I create dark, extreme horror stories, and for just $1, you can help me keep the horror alive. It's like buying me a terrifying cup of coffee to fuel the next gruesome tale. If you'd like to support, please consider donating. My PayPal link is in the description. Due to YouTube guidelines, it's difficult to create R-rated content, so I kindly request you to join me on Patreon for just $1. The rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Willow Creek," barely swung on its chains as the wind passed through the small, sleepy town. For Jenna, it was as if time had frozen. The quiet streets, the same rows of white picket fences, and the faded pastel houses all felt like an eerie echo of her childhood. She hadn't been back here in over a decade, not since her mother remarried and Jenna left for college, eager to escape the suffocating air of her stepfather's perfect little family. The recent death of her mother had pulled her back to this place, like a dark shadow clinging to her every move. Her mother's passing had been sudden, too sudden, Jenna thought. A heart attack, the doctor said. But something about it didn't sit right with her. Maybe it was the voicemail she received the night before her mother died, the one that still lingered at the back of her mind, like a half-remembered nightmare. The house stood exactly as she remembered, yet more worn down. The paint was peeling, the windows cloudy with dust. She unlocked the door and pushed it open with a creak, stepping into the past. The familiar scent of lavender and old wood filled her nose. It was her mother's home, but now there was something menacing lurking in the shadows. As Jenna wandered through the house, memories flashed, Christmases by the fire, her mother's laughter echoing through the hallways, but then there was him, Michael. Her stepfather, the man who had appeared out of nowhere in their lives when Jenna was 16, swooping in like a savior after her father died. At first, he had seemed perfect, too perfect. Charming, always wearing that crisp white shirt, his brown hair neatly combed, the smile that made everyone fall for him. He was the quintessential 80s man, all too comfortable in his skin. But Jenna had never trusted him. Now, as she stood in the quiet, lifeless house, she could almost feel his presence. Even though he was out of town for a few days, attending some, she knew he would be back soon. As Jenna unpacked her bags and settled into her childhood bedroom, she noticed something strange. An old chest sat under her bed, something that had been there for as long as she could remember. The latch was rusted, and it took some effort to pry it open. Inside, she found a series of items that sent a chill through her body, a stack of old newspapers, her mother's diaries, and a shoebox filled with trinkets. The newspapers were yellowed and brittle, the headlines from the late 80s and early 90s speaking of horrific events Jenna had long forgotten. Local woman found dead, suspected serial killer still at large, Willow Creek strangler strikes again. As Jenna flipped through the pages, a horrifying realization began to dawn on her. The dates of the murders were suspiciously close to the time when her mother had first met Michael. She felt her pulse quicken. Could it be a coincidence? Then she found something that made her stomach turn. Among the trinkets in the shoebox were items that didn't belong. A woman's bracelet, a locket, and a pair of earrings. They weren't her mother's, Jenna was sure of it. These were personal, intimate items that someone had taken as trophies. Her hands trembled as she reached for the last item in the box, an old, faded Polaroid of Michael, smiling in front of a dark red van. The same van she remembered seeing him drive when he first came into their lives. That night, Jenna barely slept. The house creaked and groaned around her, each sound amplified by the oppressive weight of the truth she was beginning to uncover. The next day, Jenna visited the local library, diving deeper into the old case files about the Willow Creek strangler. As she sat in the dimly lit archive room, a pit formed in her stomach. The victims were all young women, brutally strangled and left in secluded areas. Their personal belongings were always missing, items like jewelry, a watch, or red, the more convinced she became. Her stepfather wasn't just a charming man with a perfect smile. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. As she left the library, her mind raced. She needed proof. Her mother's death. Was it really a heart attack? Or had Michael silenced her to keep his secret buried? That evening, Jenna returned to the house and began searching through her mother's things. In the attic, she found her mother's journals, stacked neatly in a dusty corner. Her heart pounded as she opened the one dated the year her mother had met Michael. The early entries were normal enough, her mother writing about their dates, how charming he was, how safe she felt with him. But as the months went on, the tone changed. Her mother had become suspicious. There were references to late-night phone calls, Michael disappearing for days without explanation. One entry in particular made Jenna's blood run cold. "I've been having nightmares about Michael. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and he's just standing there, watching me. I don't know what to think anymore. There's something he's not telling me. Something dark." Jenna's breath quickened. She needed to get out of there. But before she could even pack her things, she heard the front door creak open. He was back. Jenna tried to calm herself as she descended the stairs, her heart racing with each step. Michael stood in the foyer, his expression soft, a smile spreading across his face as he spotted her. "Jenna," he greeted, his voice dripping with warmth. "I didn't expect you home so soon. I thought you'd be out visiting friends." She forced a smile, her stomach twisting with the knowledge of what she had found. "Just needed some time alone, I guess." Michael walked toward her, his eyes studying her a little too closely. "I understand. It's hard being back after everything, huh?" Jenna nodded, feeling her pulse thrum in her throat. "Yeah." He spoke. Jenna's mind raced, wondering how much Michael knew. Had he seen her going through her mother's things? Did he suspect she was onto him? She could feel the tension building, his presence suffocating, even as he stood there smiling like the perfect stepfather. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house felt deliberate, as if Michael was moving through the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The next morning, Jenna decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to leave the house and go to the police. But before she could make her escape, she found a note slipped under her door. "You shouldn't have gone through her things. Let's talk." Tonight, her blood ran cold. He knew. Jenna spent the rest of the day locked in her room, frantically trying to call friends, anyone who could help her. But the phone lines were dead, and her cell had no signal. As night fell, she heard footsteps outside her room. Michael's voice came through the door, calm and sweet. "Jenna, we need to talk." She grabbed the only weapon she could find, a heavy lamp, and opened the door slowly. Michael stood there, his face half hidden in the shadows, his expression unreadable. "I know what you're thinking," he said, stepping closer, his voice almost soothing. "But you're wrong. You've always been wrong about me." Jenna tightened her grip on the lamp. Her breath shallow. "Your mother. She didn't die of a heart attack." His eyes glinted with something dark, something dangerous. "She knew too much. She was going to leave me." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. "You killed her." Michael took another step forward, his smile widening. "She would have ruined everything. And now you're going to ruin everything too, aren't you, Jenna?" Before she could respond, Michael lunged at her. Jenna swung the lamp, smashing it into his head. He stumbled back, blood streaming down his face, but it only seemed spoke. Jenna's mind raced, wondering how much Michael knew. Had he seen her going through her mother's things? Did he suspect she was onto him? She could feel the tension building, his presence suffocating, even as he stood there smiling like the perfect stepfather. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house felt deliberate, as if Michael was moving through the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The next morning, Jenna decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to leave the house and go to the police. But before she could make her escape, she found a note slipped under her door. "You shouldn't have gone through her things. Let's talk." Tonight, her blood ran cold. He knew. Jenna spent the rest of the day locked in her room, frantically trying to call friends, anyone who could help her. But the phone lines were dead, and her cell had no signal. As night fell, she heard footsteps outside her room. Michael's voice came through the door, calm and sweet. "Jenna, we need to talk." She grabbed the only weapon she could find, a heavy lamp, and opened the door slowly. Michael stood there, his face half hidden in the shadows, his expression unreadable. "I know what you're thinking," he said, stepping closer, his voice almost soothing. "But you're wrong. You've always been wrong about me." Jenna tightened her grip on the lamp. Her breath shallow. "Your mother. She didn't die of a heart attack." His eyes glinted with something dark, something dangerous. "She knew too much. She was going to leave me." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. "You killed her." Michael took another step forward, his smile widening. "She would have ruined everything. And now you're going to ruin everything too, aren't you, Jenna?" Before she could respond, Michael lunged at her. Jenna swung the lamp, smashing it into his head. He stumbled back, blood streaming down his face, but it only seemed to shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house felt deliberate, as if Michael was moving through the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The next morning, Jenna decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to leave the house and go to the police. But before she could make her escape, she found a note slipped under her door. "You shouldn't have gone through her things. Let's talk." Tonight, her blood ran cold. He knew. Jenna spent the rest of the day locked in her room, frantically trying to call friends, anyone who could help her. But the phone lines were dead, and her cell had no signal. As night fell, she heard footsteps outside her room. Michael's voice came through the door, calm and sweet. "Jenna, we need to talk." She grabbed the only weapon she could find, a heavy lamp, and opened the door slowly. Michael stood there, his face half hidden in the shadows, his expression unreadable. "I know what you're thinking," he said, stepping closer, his voice almost soothing. "But you're wrong. You've always been wrong about me." Jenna tightened her grip on the lamp, her breath shallow. "Your mother. She didn't die of a heart attack." His eyes glinted with something dark, something dangerous. "She knew too much. She was going to leave me." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. "You killed her." Michael took another step forward, his smile widening. "She would have ruined everything. And now you're going to ruin everything too, aren't you, Jenna?" Before she could respond, Michael lunged at her. Jenna swung the lamp, smashing it into his head. He stumbled back, blood streaming down his face, but it only seemed to fuel his rage. "You're just like her," he growled, his voice now twisted with fury. "You always were." Jenna ran, her heart racing, but Michael was faster. He grabbed her, his hands like a vice around her throat. "Just let it happen, Jenna," he whispered, his breath hot against her soon. But Jenna wasn't going to go down without a fight. In the chaos, Jenna managed to break free, kicking Michael in the stomach and sending him crashing into the hallway wall. She sprinted down the stairs, her legs trembling, her vision blurred by panic. Michael was right behind her. She burst into the kitchen, grabbing the nearest knife. When Michael appeared in the doorway, blood dripping down his face, he looked like something out of a nightmare. "Put it down, Jenna," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You don't want to do this." Jenna's wrist throbbed with pain as Michael twisted it, his grip like iron. She screamed, but no one could hear her in the house. Hidden so deep in the woods of Willow Creek. The knife clattered to the ground, and Michael's face was inches from hers. The charming facade he had worn for years still clung to him like a mask, but behind his eyes, Jenna saw something darker, a gleam of control, power, and sadistic pleasure. She stumbled back, breathing heavily, as he calmly picked up the knife and set it on the kitchen counter. "Jenna, you've been through so much. I know this is hard for you," he cooed softly, stepping closer. His voice had the same reassuring tone he had used when she was younger, when he was still playing the role of doting stepfather. "Losing your mother, coming back here after all these years. It's overwhelming, isn't it?" Her heart pounded in her chest, and she tried to fight off the dizziness that clouded her mind. His voice had a strange effect on her, calming, even seductive in a twisted way. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to get away from him, but something kept her frozen, paralyzed by the weight of his words and the way he moved so confidently, like a predator circling its prey. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the kitchen chair. "We need to talk." Jenna shook her head. "No. I'm leaving." "Jenna," Michael said, his voice dropping into a chilling whisper. "Sit." But Jenna wasn't going to go down without a fight. In the chaos, Jenna managed to break free, kicking Michael in the stomach and sending him crashing into the hallway wall. She sprinted down the stairs, her legs trembling, her vision blurred by panic. Michael was right behind her. She burst into the kitchen, grabbing the nearest knife. When Michael appeared in the doorway, blood dripping down his face, he looked like something out of a nightmare. "Put it down, Jenna," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You don't want to do this." Jenna's wrist throbbed with pain as Michael twisted it, his grip like iron. She screamed, but no one could hear her in the house. Hidden so deep in the woods of Willow Creek. The knife clattered to the ground, and Michael's face was inches from hers. The charming facade he had worn for years still clung to him like a mask, but behind his eyes, Jenna saw something darker, a gleam of control, power, and sadistic pleasure. She stumbled back, breathing heavily, as he calmly picked up the knife and set it on the kitchen counter. "Jenna, you've been through so much. I know this is hard for you," he cooed softly, stepping closer. His voice had the same reassuring tone he had used when she was younger, when he was still playing the role of doting stepfather. "Losing your mother, coming back here after all these years. It's overwhelming, isn't it?" Her heart pounded in her chest, and she tried to fight off the dizziness that clouded her mind. His voice had a strange effect on her, calming, even seductive in a twisted way. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to get away from him, but something kept her frozen, paralyzed by the weight of his words and the way he moved so confidently, like a predator circling its prey. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the kitchen chair. "We need to talk." Jenna shook her head. "No. I'm leaving." "Jenna," Michael said, his voice dropping into a chilling whisper. "Sit." Undeniable command in his voice, one that made her skin crawl. Trembling, she obeyed, sinking into the chair as Michael loomed over her, his fingers lightly trailing the edge of the knife on the counter. He seemed so composed, so in control, and yet, she could sense the danger simmering beneath the surface. "You've been through my things," he continued, his tone even but laced with a dark undercurrent. "I found the chest in your room. You've been snooping, haven't you?" Jenna felt her stomach turn, a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. "I wasn't," he pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. "You don't have to explain. I understand you're curious. But some things are better left buried." The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. He was too calm, too collected, as if this was all part of some twisted game. Jenna swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her pulse raced, and she could feel the cold edge of fear digging into her mind. The charming man she had known all her life was standing right in front of her, but there was something else lurking just beneath the surface, something monstrous that she couldn't quite grasp. Michael knelt in front of her, his face softening with concern. He reached out, cupping her chin gently, tilting her head up so that she had no choice but to look into his eyes. "I know you're scared," he murmured, his voice dripping with a false sense of comfort. "But you don't have to be. I'll take care of you, Jenna. Just like I always have." Jenna's skin crawled under his touch, but there was an odd sense of comfort in the familiarity of it. She hated herself for feeling it, for feeling even a hint of safety in the hands of this man who had controlled her family for years. Michael smiled, that same disarming smile that had charmed her mother so easily. "You've always been so strong, Jenna. So much like your mother. But strength can be dangerous, especially when it makes you digging where you shouldn't." Her breath hitched. The words felt like a warning, a veiled threat wrapped in affection. She tried to pull back, but Michael's hand gripped her chin tighter. "You've been such a good girl, Jenna. All these years, you've trusted me. Why stop now? His voice was smooth, hypnotic, weaving itself into her thoughts. You're not like the others. You're special. Jenna's heart raced, her mind spinning with confusion. She wasn't sure what he meant, but she didn't want to find out. Her body tensed, every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to escape the suffocating presence of this man who had once been so familiar and now felt like a stranger. But then, just as quickly as the tension had mounted, Michael released her, standing up and stepping back. I'm going to make dinner, he said, his voice returning to its usual calm, matter-of-fact tone. Why don't you go upstairs and rest? You look like you could use it. Jenna blinked, trying to process the abrupt shift. I don't, go. His smile returned, but this time there was something darker behind it, something that made her blood run cold. Jenna stood, her legs shaky beneath her, and made her way to the stairs, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. She could feel Michael's eyes on her as she ascended, the weight of his gaze like a noose tightening around her neck. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on her. Jenna paced back and forth, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of everything. The evidence she had found, her mother's journals, the strange couldn't help but wonder if his protection had been a prison all along, a way to keep them under his control. She grabbed her phone, praying for a signal. Nothing. The bars were dead. Her stomach churned. He had done this, cut off her access to the outside world. She was trapped. A soft knock on the door startled her. Jenna froze. Jenna? Michael's voice floated through the wood, soft and soothing, like honey laced with venom. Dinner's ready. Come down when you're feeling better. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she barely managed a weak response. I'll be down soon. She waited until his footsteps retreated before rushing to the window. It was locked. The small latch refused to budge. Jenna cursed under her breath, searching for another way out, but the house had become a fortress. The only way out was through Michael. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her strength and steeled herself for what she had to do. She had to outsmart him, play along until she could find her moment. She had to survive. When Jenna descended the stairs, the scent of roasted meat wafted through the air. The kitchen table was set with fine china and silverware, candles flickering in the center. It was an odd scene, almost romantic in its intimacy, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The quiet tension between them felt like a noose tightening around her throat with each passing moment. Michael smiled warmly as he set a plate in front of her. I made your favorite. Roast lamb, just like your mother used to make. Jenna's stomach churned at the thought of food, but she forced a polite smile. Thanks. They ate in silence, the only sound the soft clinking of silverware against porcelain. Jenna kept her eyes on her plate, avoiding Michael's gaze. She couldn't afford to let him see the fear gnawing at her insides. Not yet. Michael, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. He sipped his wine, watching her with a calm, but she couldn't let him see her discomfort. You've always been such a strong woman, Jenna, Michael said, his voice low and soothing. Just like your mother. It's one of the things I've always admired about you. Jenna's fork hovered in midair. The way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on her, felt wrong, too intimate, too familiar. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to respond. Thanks. Michael leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. You know, your mother and I had our differences, but we always worked through them. We always found a way to connect. His eyes locked onto hers, the implication in his words heavy with meaning. Jenna's pulse quickened. Her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Was this his way of manipulating her? Twisting her memories of her mother? She couldn't shake the feeling that Michael had been grooming her, subtly, insidiously, over the years. I know this is hard for you, Michael continued, his voice dripping with sympathy. But you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here for you, Jenna. Always. The air between them grew thicker, more oppressive. Jenna could feel the weight of his gaze, the way his eyes roved over her with a predatory intensity. He was waiting for her to break, to surrender to the twisted power he held over her. Jenna pushed her chair back, standing on shaky legs. Michael's gaze followed her every move, a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. The dinner, the false sense of normalcy, it was all a game to him, a sick way of maintaining control. She knew that now. "I think I need some air," Jenna muttered, not daring to meet his gaze. Her skin crawled at the sensation of his eyes trailing her, the subtle hunger behind them. Michael didn't protest. He simply nodded, taking another sip of his wine, that eerie smile still playing at the corner of his lips. "Of course, sweetheart. Take your time." Said it, "sweetheart," made her blood run cold. It wasn't affectionate. It was possessive. Jenna forced herself to walk calmly to the door, fighting the urge to break into a run. Every step felt like wading through quicksand, as though the air around her had thickened with the weight of his unspoken intentions. She needed to get out of this house. She needed to find out what he had done, what he was hiding. Once she was outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap. She inhaled deeply, her mind racing. The trees loomed like silent sentinels in the darkness, and the wind rustled through the leaves with an unsettling whisper. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. There was no one around for miles. Jenna's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, relief flooding her when she saw the single bar of signal flicker to life. Without thinking, she dialed her friend Maria's number, her fingers trembling as she pressed the phone to her ear. It rang twice before Maria's voice answered, slightly muffled. "Jenna? What's going on? You okay?" Jenna glanced back at the house, her heart pounding. "Maria, something's wrong. I'm at the house with Michael, and I found some things about my mom, and I think he's hiding something. I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end, and then Maria's voice came back, low and serious. "What did you find?" Jenna hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "Old newspaper clippings. About murders. In this town. And, there's this box, hidden in my mom's closet. It has weird stuff. Things I don't understand. Michael's acting strange. He's been trying to manipulate me, I can feel it." Maria was silent for a moment, then spoke, her tone firm. "Jenna, you need to get out of there. Don't confront him. Just leave. Come to my place, we'll figure it out together." "I can't just leave." Jenna's voice caught in her throat. She didn't know trying to escape felt like an impossible task. She could feel his presence looming even when he wasn't there. "Jenna, please. This doesn't sound right. He sounds dangerous." Jenna knew Maria was right, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the twisted pull of wanting to understand what was really happening, the need to confront the darkness that had overshadowed her family for years. "I'll call you back," Jenna whispered, hanging up before Maria could protest. She stood there for a moment longer, staring at the darkened windows of the house, her mind swirling with fragmented memories and the weight of her mother's secrets. Michael had always been so composed, so controlled. But now, that control felt like a mask, and she had glimpsed something far more sinister underneath. Jenna made her way back inside, the door creaking ominously as she stepped into the dimly lit hallway. Her body felt tense, like a coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. She needed to find answers, real answers. She couldn't just leave without knowing what had happened to her mother, without knowing what kind of man Michael really was. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. Jenna moved quietly, her steps careful and measured as she made her way toward her mother's old bedroom. She had to look through that box again. There had to be more, something that connected Michael to the murders. The room was just as she remembered it, untouched since her mother's death. The scent of lavender still lingered in the air, a faint reminder of the woman who had once lived here. Jenna's stomach twisted with guilt. She had never questioned her mother's sudden decline in health, had never thought to look deeper. But now, standing in the middle of this room, she realized how blind she had been. The box was still there, hidden under a pile of old clothes in the closet. Jenna out with trembling hands. The contents spilled out onto the floor, old photographs, letters, small trinkets. And then, buried beneath it all, a small leather-bound journal, her mother's journal. Jenna's breath caught in her throat as she opened it, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was familiar, but shaky, as though her mother had written these entries during her final days. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the words, each one hitting her like a punch to the gut. Michael watches me when he thinks I'm asleep. He's changed. I don't know what happened, but he's not the same man I married. I hear noises at night. In the basement. Michael says it's nothing. But I don't believe him. I'm scared, Jenna. I'm so scared. I found something in Michael's study today. Something horrible. I don't know what to do. If I confront him, I know he'll kill me. Jenna's hands trembled as she read the final entry. If anything happens to me, it's because of Michael. Don't trust him. Don't ever trust him. Her mother had known. She had known what kind of man Michael really was, and she had been too terrified to act. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had to get out. Now, but as she stood, clutching the journal in her hands, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. The soft creak of footsteps behind her. Jenna spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Michael stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with something dark and dangerous. What are you doing in here, Jenna? His voice was calm, too calm, and it sent a chill down her spine. She tried to hide the journal behind her back, but it was too late. Michael's eyes flicked to the box on the floor, and his expression darkened. I see you've been busy, he said, stepping into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. Digging took a step back, her pulse racing. I just wanted to know the truth. Michael's smile was cold, predatory. The truth? Oh, sweetheart, the truth is far worse than you could ever imagine. Before she could react, Michael lunged at her, his hand closing around her throat with terrifying force. Jenna gasped, clawing at his hand as he shoved her against the wall, his face inches from hers. You think you can just waltz in here and uncover my secrets? He hissed, his voice dripping with venom. You think you're going to escape? Jenna struggled, her vision blurring as his grip tightened. Panic surged through her, but she refused to give in. With a desperate burst of strength, she kicked him hard in the shin, causing him to stumble back just enough for her to break free. She bolted for the door, her heart pounding in her chest, but Michael was fast, too fast. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back with brutal force. Jenna screamed, her scalp burning with pain as she was thrown to the ground. Michael loomed over her, his breath ragged, his eyes wild with fury. You're just like your mother, he snarled. Weak. Stupid. Jenna's vision swam as she tried to crawl away, but Michael grabbed her by the ankle, dragging her across the floor. She kicked and thrashed, desperate to break free, but his grip was like iron. I should have killed you both when I had the chance. He muttered, his voice low and filled with hatred. Jenna's blood ran cold at his words. He had killed her mother. She had been right all along. With a surge of adrenaline, Jenna twisted around, grabbing the nearest object, an old, heavy lamp, and swung it at Michael's head. The lamp connected with a sickening thud, and Michael staggered back, blood streaming down his face. Jenna didn't waste a second. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. There had to be something down there, something that could prove what Michael had done. Jenna stumbled down the narrow stairs, the darkness of the basement swallowing her whole. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she fumbled for the light switch, her fingers trembling. Flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows across the basement. The room smelled of dampness and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. Jenna's breath hitched as she scanned the space, her eyes catching on a large, rusted metal door at the far end. She could hear Michael above, his heavy footsteps thudding across the floor as he descended the stairs slowly, methodically, like a predator stalking its prey. Jenna had only minutes, maybe less. She rushed to the door, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. It gave way with a metallic click, and the door swung open with a creak that echoed ominously in the basement silence. What she saw inside made her stomach churn. The room was lined with old, faded photographs of women. Some of them were in various stages of undress, others were lifeless, their eyes wide and empty. Each photograph was labeled with dates, some going back years, and then there were the tools. A horrifying array of knives, scalpels, chains, and instruments she couldn't even begin to name, all meticulously arranged on a large metal table, stained with what could only be blood. Jenna's mind reeled as she realized the truth. Michael had been killing women for years, methodically torturing them, documenting it all like some kind of sick hobby. The clippings about the murders, the strange, unsettling behavior. Her stepfather was not just a killer. He was a monster. Her knees buckled, and for a moment, she thought she might be sick. But then she heard Michael's voice, echoing down the stairs, cold and calm as ever. "You shouldn't have come down here, Jenna." Panic surged through her, but with it came a surge of clarity. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let him get away with this. Jenna grabbed one of the knives from the table, holding it tightly in her hand as Michael appeared in the doorway, blood dripping from the gash on his forehead where she had hit him with the lamp. His expression was calm, almost eyes burned with a manic intensity that chilled her to the bone. "You've seen too much," he said, stepping toward her slowly. "But it doesn't matter. No one's going to believe you. They'll think you're crazy, just like your mother." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. "You killed her. You killed my mom." Michael shrugged, wiping the blood from his face with the back of his hand. "She got in the way. Just like you." Jenna took a step back, gripping the knife tighter. "I'm not like her." Michael's smile widened, cold and cruel. "Oh, you are. Weak. Helpless." He lunged at her, but Jenna was ready. With a scream, she slashed at him with the knife, catching him across the arm. Michael cursed, his expression darkening as blood flowed from the wound. He grabbed her wrist with terrifying strength, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. Jenna cried out in pain as he shoved her against the wall, pinning her with his weight. "I could have loved you, Jenna," he hissed, his breath hot against her ear. "But now, you're just another loose end." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest, terror surging through her veins as she fought against him, but Michael was too strong, too determined. She could feel his hand closing around her throat, squeezing tighter, her vision starting to blur. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the basement, and a voice shouted, "Police! Get on the ground!" The pressure on her throat vanished as Michael released her, spinning around to face the intruders. Jenna collapsed to the floor, gasping for air as she looked up to see two police officers, their guns drawn, advancing toward Michael. "Drop the weapon." One of the officers shouted, his voice commanding. Michael's face twisted into a snarl, but he didn't back down. Instead, he grabbed one of the scalpels from the table, holding it up as he took a step toward the officers. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "You don't know." Didn't hesitate. He fired a shot, the bullet hitting Michael in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. Michael let out a guttural scream, his body crumpling to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Jenna's whole body trembled as she watched the officers rush to secure Michael, cuffing his hands behind his back. He thrashed weakly, muttering under his breath, but the fight was gone from him. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern face, knelt down beside Jenna. "Are you okay, miss?" Jenna nodded, though she wasn't sure she could ever truly be okay after what she had just witnessed. "He killed my mother," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's been killing women for years." The officer's expression softened, and he nodded grimly. "We'll take care of him. You're safe now." "Safe?" The word felt foreign to her, like something that no longer existed in her world. But as she looked at Michael, now bleeding and handcuffed on the floor, the monstrous facade finally broken, she realized that she had won. Her stepfather, her tormentor, was finally exposed for what he truly was. The charming mask he had worn for so many years was shattered, and there was no hiding the darkness underneath anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur. The police swarmed the house, gathering evidence from the basement, documenting every gruesome detail. Jenna sat outside on the front porch. Wrapped in a blanket, her mind numb as she tried to process everything that had happened, the truth about her mother, the years of manipulation, the darkness that had festered in her home. It was all finally out in the open. But the weight of it felt overwhelming. The air was thick with the echoes of everything she had uncovered, the horrors that had lived beneath the surface for so long. A female officer sat beside her, offering a gentle smile. "You were brave, Jenna. Most people wouldn't have been able." Her throat dry. "I didn't have a choice." The officer nodded. "Even so, you stopped him. He won't hurt anyone else." For the first time since it all began, Jenna felt a small sense of relief. The weight on her chest lightened, just a fraction, as the realization set in. Michael was gone. He was in custody, and he would never hurt anyone again. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the house, Jenna knew that things would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, she could begin to heal. Months later, Jenna stood at the edge of the property, looking out at the house that had once been her home. The police tape was long gone, but the memories of that night lingered in every corner of the building. The basement had been sealed off, the evidence catalogued, and Michael had been sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. Jenna had testified at the trial, revealing the horrors she had uncovered, the women Michael had killed, the twisted secrets he had kept hidden for so long. The media had dubbed him the charming killer, a title that made Jenna's skin crawl every time she heard it. But at least now, the world knew the truth. As she walked away from the house for the final time, Jenna felt a strange mix of emotions, grief, relief, and something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. The past would always haunt her, but she had survived. She had faced the monster in her life and come out on the other side.